I still remember the words like knives cutting through my chest. Your mom's just a maid. She cannot sit with mine. He laughed, a cruel, sharp laugh that echoed in the dining hall. I held my head high, but inside, my heart was pounding, my hands trembling around my friend's hand. Every fiber of me wanted to scream, to lash out, to vanish, but I stayed and I watched. I waited, because I knew something he did not tie was not powerless. And by the end of that night, he would learn exactly what happens when you underestimate someone like me. My name is Sofia. I am 22. And I have always believed that the world judges people by the weight of their wallets rather than the size of their hearts. I grew up in a modest home where my mother worked as a maid to support us, and my father. Well, he left long before I could even remember. Despite that, my childhood was filled with laughter, with small victories, with a sense of pride in our little world. My mother, with her worn hands and gentle smile, taught me that dignity is not about wealth, but about strength, resilience, and compassion. I never thought my world would collide with someone like Aiden. He was charming, possibly confident, and wrapped in a glow of privilege. He came from a wealthy family, a household where marble floors gleamed, chandeliers sparkled, and the air smelled of polished success. I met him at university, and he seemed to notice me in a way that no one else had. His gaze lingered. His laugh felt warm, and for a while, I allowed myself to believe he was different. We became close quickly, called me intelligent, clever, and funny. Kay held my hand in the quiet corners of the campus library and whispered secrets that made my heart flutter. But behind the warmth, there was a sharpness I failed to see at first. Subtle superiority. Smirk that lingered too long when he talked about his life, his friends, his family. I brushed it off, convincing myself that confidence was attractive even when it bordered on arrogance. The first time I truly glimpsed the world I had stepped into was the night of his family's dinner party. I had been nervous for weeks. The mansion itself was intimidating, towering pillars, polished marble that reflected my own hesitant movements. A grand chandelier casting fractured light across the room. Everything screamed perfection, opulence, and an unspoken expectation that I would somehow fit in seamlessly. I walked in holding my friend's hand for support, trying to hide the nervous flutter of my stomach. Aiden's family greeted me with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I smiled back, careful, poised, but I could feel the judgment in the air. I tried to engage in conversation, to laugh at jokes that felt slightly too sharp, to keep my voice steady while my heart raced. And then it happened. I will never forget the words. They cut deeper than any physical pain I had ever felt. Your mom's just a maid. She cannot sit with mine. Time froze. My grip on my friend's hand tightened until my knuckles ached. The room seemed to tilt, and every pair of eyes fell on me. Aiden's laugh, loud, cruel, dripping with superiority, oded off the high ceilings. People around us murmured, some shocked, some laughing nervously, caught between politeness and discomfort. I felt my face burn with shame and fury, a storm of emotions churning inside me. My stomach flipped, my chest tightened, and for a moment I wanted to vanish, to scream, to lash out. But I did not. I stood there, holding my friend's hand, pretending the words did not pierce me. My mind raced, cataloging every humiliation, every sneer, every dismissive glance. And then, amidst the embarrassment, a spark of something new flickered inside me. Determination. I realized in that instant that humiliation could either crush me or fuel me, and I chose fuel. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I nodded politely, smiled when I had to, and carefully avoided his gaze when I could. But beneath the surface, I was observing. Every detail mattered. The way he strutted across the room, confident in the assumed loyalty of his friends. The way his family nodded at his jokes, accepting his arrogance as truth. Every micro-expression, every careless word, became a piece of a puzzle I would solve later. As I left that night, the cold night air brushing against my tear-streaked cheeks, I made a silent promise. He would not get away with this. My mother's dignity would not be dismissed, and my own pride would not be broken. I would not retaliate out of impulse. I would wait. I would watch. and I would make sure that when the time came, he would regret underestimating me. That night, as I drove home, the city lights blurred against the window, and my mother's words echoed in my mind. Strength is not in retaliation, Sofia. Strength is in patience and in knowing your own worth. I had known worth all my life, but for the first time, I realized it was time to let the world see it, to especially the people who thought they could diminish me. Little did Aiden know, the very arrogance that made him feel untouchable was the same arrogance that would lead to his downfall. And I, 22, underestimated by everyone around me, was quietly preparing to reclaim what he thought he could take: respect, dignity, and justice. If you have ever been belittled, laughed at, or told you did not belong, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for anyone who has been underestimated. It is about pain, patience, and the sweet taste of justice served cold. The weeks after that dinner party were unbearable. Aiden seemed almost emboldened by his cruelty, as if mocking me had given him power. It started subtly, little comments in class that were easy for others to overlook, but impossible for me to ignore. "A sly? I guess not everyone has a proper education at home," whispered, while tapping his pen on the desk. A glance from him that made my skin crawl, a smirk that carried the weight of privilege like a weapon. I tried to rise above it, to act unaffected, but the reality was stark. Each slight, each laughter at my expense, dug a trench of humiliation I could not fill. I began noticing the way people in his circle reacted. Some laughed nervously, unsure whether to side with him or avoid trouble. Others, like me, felt anger simmering but remained silent. He thrived in that tension, using his confidence as armor, wielding arrogance like a sword. The breaking point came during a group presentation. It was a class project meant to test collaboration, yet he turned it into another stage for humiliation. I had spent days preparing, crafting every detail, memorizing every fact, hoping to impress. As I began presenting, he interrupted loudly and deliberately. Dismissing my research as amateur work in front of the professor and the class, the words echoed in my ears like the first time he humiliated me. My heart pounded. I wanted to scream, to knock over his notes, to shatter the smug look on his face. But I did nothing. Instead, I smiled politely, adjusted my posture, and let him speak. Every fiber of me ached to strike back, yet something in that pain solidified my resolve. I realized retaliation in the moment would have been satisfying only briefly. True satisfaction would come later, and it would be precise. Over the following days, Aiden's cruelty escalated. He made cutting remarks in group chats, subtle digs about my background, my mother's work. "I guess some of us are born into luxury, while others work for it," he typed once, and his friends reacted with emojis and approving messages. Every insult was a reminder of the power imbalance he thought existed. At first, I felt powerless. I wondered if I had misjudged my chances. But then I began watching him, not just observing his cruelty, but studying it. I noticed patterns, the way he sought validation, the way he assumed control because no one dared challenge him. Oh, his arrogance was his weakness. His confidence was brittle, dependent on social approval, and that knowledge became my weapon. One evening, he invited me to yet another gathering. I could see the anticipation in his eyes, the smug certainty that he would humiliate me again. My palms were sweating as we approached the house, the sound of his laughter preceding us like an omen. The chandelier-lit rooms glimmered with luxury, but they also reflected the tension I felt coiling in my chest. He greeted me with that same fake warmth, but there was a subtle edge this time, a challenge, a dare. Almost daring me to break under the scrutiny of his wealthy peers. During the dinner, he made a point of placing my mother's absence at the forefront. He told stories about his own family's achievements, turning every conversation into a competition I could never win in their eyes. Every comment, every smirk, every sideways glance from his friends was a nail in the coffin of my composure. But I remained poised. By the time dessert arrived, the tension was suffocating. Aiden laughed loudly, recounting an incident from the dinner party where he had mocked my mother. "I still cannot believe she let her daughter come here," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I mean, really? A maid." My friends could not stop laughing. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, not in impulse, but in a quiet, calculated awareness. Every humiliation, every insult, every smirk had been building a foundation. And now the stage was set. I realized that the very arrogance that made him untouchable was the same arrogance that would ensure his downfall. That night, I left the party feeling a storm of emotions, shame, fury, determination, but most importantly, clarity. I would not fight him in the open. I would not retaliate recklessly. I would strike strategically, exploiting every weakness, every blind spot. I replayed his words in my mind, every laugh, every jab, every sneer, turning them into a map for the revenge I would craft. I knew it would not be immediate. Patience would be my ally, observation my tool. And as I drove home under the city lights, I felt a strange thrill, the anticipation of justice waiting to unfold. He had thought he had humiliated me completely. He had no idea that the worst was yet to come, and that it would be delivered with a precision he could never anticipate. The game had changed, and now I held the pieces. The night I finally reached my breaking point is etched into my memory like a scar I cannot forget. It was another evening at university, another day of enduring Aiden's smirks and subtle jabs. I had tried to maintain composure, to smile through the humiliation, but something inside me snapped that day. It started small, an offhand comment during a group discussion. He said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I do not know why she even tries. Some of us are just born better." The room went silent for a moment, then his friends chuckled, nodding in agreement. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, my hands trembling in my lap. My thoughts were a storm, a whirlwind of fury, shame, and disbelief. I wanted to stand up and scream, to let him see the anger I had been suppressing for weeks, but I did not. I clenched my fists under the table, nails digging into my palms until they ached. And then it hit me. I realized that screaming, lashing out in the moment, would give him exactly what he wanted. A spectacle, a display of weakness disguised as anger. That was when I understood the truth. My power had not been taken from me. It had only been dormant, waiting for the right moment for me to reclaim it. I went home that night, my body exhausted but my mind alive with clarity. The city lights blurred past the car window as I replayed every humiliation, every laugh, every insult. Each memory was no longer just paneet, was ammunition. Each sneer he had given me was a map, pointing out exactly how and where he thought he was untouchable. I began planning quietly, obsessively. I would not act impulsively. I would craft the perfect plan, one that would leave him exposed in front of everyone who had ever laughed at me. The more I thought, the more I realized the truth of my own power. He had underestimated me. He had assumed that because I had been polite, because I had smiled through his cruelty, I was weak. He did not see the fire that burned beneath my calm exterior. And that ignorance, his arrogance, was exactly what I would use against him. I started observing him closely, noting every habit, every arrogance-driven misstep. The way he thrived on attention, the way he needed validation from his friends, the way he assumed control over every room he entered, every conversation he dominated. Each behavior became a piece of a puzzle I could exploit. His confidence was brittle, dependent on the admiration of others. That admiration could be stripped away if only I knew how. By the end of that week, I had made a decision. I would no longer allow him to define my self-worth. I would not react emotionally in the moment. I would act strategically. Okay? I would wait, I would plan, and I would strike at the perfect time. I felt a thrill run through me, a mix of fear, exhilaration, and certainty. This was no longer about humiliation or revenge in the petty sense. This was about reclaiming control, dignity, and justice. That night, I sat at my desk, scribbling notes, tracing connections, and thinking through every possible scenario. My plan had to be precise. Every detail mattered: the timing, the audience, the reactions. I could not afford mistakes. I was no longer the girl who had stood silently while he laughed at my mother. I was someone entirely different now, calculated, patient, and determined. I realized that revenge is not about anger. It is about intelligence, observation, and timing. I would not lash out recklessly. I would orchestrate every moment, turning his arrogance against him. I would show him and everyone around him that power is not about wealth or status or confidence. It is about control and patience and knowing your own worth. As I sat in the quiet of my room that night, I felt a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. The girl who had walked into his mansion trembling and humiliated no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone who had seen the world clearly for the first time. Someone who knew that humiliation can be a weapon if wielded with patience. And in that moment, I promised myself, quietly but firmly, the next time he underestimated me, it would be the last. He would never laugh at me or my family again. He would never assume that arrogance could protect him. I would make sure that when the time came, he would understand exactly what happens when you push someone too far and that person refuses to stay down. The storm inside me had settled, replaced by a cold, focused determination. I had reached my breaking point, but in that breaking point, I found clarity. And now the countdown had begun. I would wait. I would plan. And when the moment was right, Aiden would finally meet the consequences of his arrogance. The plan did not come to me all at once. It formed slowly, like a storm gathering strength. Every night, I sat at my desk with a notebook open, the soft hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. My heartbeat steady but deliberate. I wrote his name at the top of the page, Aiden. Underneath it, I listed everything I knew about him. His need for attention, his obsession with reputation, his fear of being seen as ordinary, his desperate hunger to be admired. I did not need to attack his wealth. I needed to attack the image he protected more than anything else. Step 1 was patience. I stopped reacting to his insults. I became calm. To calm. I smiled more. I nodded when he spoke. I became invisible in the way that makes people careless. He began to believe he had broken me. That belief made him sloppy. Step 2 was observation. I watched how he interacted with his social circle. I noticed who copied his behavior, who laughed the loudest at his jokes, who hesitated before agreeing. Those hesitant ones were my entry point. They were uncomfortable with his cruelty but too afraid to challenge him. All they needed was a reason to stop protecting him. Step 3 was positioning. I began spending more time with those people. Quiet conversations. Soft questions. Nothing accusatory, nothing direct. Just subtle reminders. Does he always talk like that? You ever feel uncomfortable when he jokes about people? Do you think he realizes how harsh he sounds? Each question was a seed. And seeds grow when watered by truth. Then came step 4, documentation. I started saving everything. Screenshots of group chats, voice notes where his arrogance slipped into cruelty, videos from parties where his jokes crossed the line. I never reacted. I never confronted. I simply collected. My phone became a silent vault of his own words, his own behavior, his own undoing. The tension built inside me like a held breath. Every saved message felt like tightening a knot. Every recording felt like loading another chamber. I could feel the moment approaching. The air around me even felt different, heavier, charged with anticipation. Step 5 was the stage. I needed an audience, not just any audience. His audience. It's the people whose opinions fed his ego, the people he performed for. The opportunity came when his family announced another large gathering at their estate, celebrating a business milestone. He was proud, loud about it, boasting about how important it would be. I smiled when he told me. My pulse stayed steady. My hands did not shake. Inside, everything aligned. This was it. In the days leading up to the event, I prepared like a conductor before an orchestra performance. Every detail mattered. timing, placement, visibility. I organized my evidence. I edited nothing. I changed nothing. I let his own words remain untouched, raw, unfiltered, honest in their cruelty. Step 6 was alignment. I quietly sent anonymous messages to a few people in his circle. Not accusations, just hints. You might want to see this. Before the party, you should know who you are supporting. I did not send everything. It's just enough to stir discomfort. Just enough to make them watch him differently. The night of the event arrived with cool air and glowing lights. The estate shimmered like a palace. Cars lined the driveway like a display of status. Music floated through the open doors. Laughter echoed against marble walls. I walked in, calm, grounded. My dress was simple but elegant. My posture was steady. My eyes were clear. I was no longer nervous. I was ready. Aiden greeted me with his usual confidence, his smile sharp and careless. "You look composed tonight," he said. I smiled back. He had no idea what that meant. Step 7 was timing. I waited. I watched him command the room, watched him tell stories, watched him mock subtly, comfortably, as if cruelty were entertainment. Every laugh he received tightened the pressure. When the room was full, when attention was high, when his voice was loudest, I moved. I approached the central screen that displayed photos from the event. I had already prepared the file. One click, that was all it took. My finger hovered over the button. My heart was steady, my breathing slow. This was not anger. This was execution. The first message appeared. His words, his tone, his cruelty. Silence spread like a wave. Then another. Then another. Gasps. Shifting bodies, whispers. The air changed instantly. I stood still. I did not speak. I did not explain. I let the evidence speak for me. His jokes, his insults, his arrogance, projected larger than his confidence had ever been. The room was no longer his stage. It was his courtroom. He turned pale. His mouth opened. No words came out. His eyes searched the room for support, but the support was gone. People were not laughing now. They were watching, judging, understanding. Step 8 was restraint. I did not humiliate him with insults. I did not raise my voice. I simply said, quietly but clearly, "This is who you are when you think no one is watching." The silence after that was heavier than any scream. I felt warmth rise in my chest. Not rage, relief, validation, strength. My hands were steady. My spine was straight. My voice did not tremble. This was not revenge driven by hatred. This was justice built with patience. And I knew in that moment that the power he thought he owned had never been his. It had always belonged to the one who stayed quiet long enough to strike perfectly. The moment arrived slowly, like the pause before a storm breaks. Aiden was standing at the center of the room, the chandelier light catching the slick confidence in his hair, the arrogance in the tilt of his head. He was laughing, telling another story, flaunting his charm as if it were armor. The kind of laugh that had haunted me for weeks, that had cut through every shred of dignity I thought I had. But not tonight. Tonight, it would recoil. I stepped forward, my heels clicking softly against the marble floors. The sound was deliberate, controlled, drawing eyes toward me without a word. The room, previously humming with chatter and laughter, shifted instantly, tension threading the air like electricity. I could feel at every pair of eyes turning, some curious, some cautious, some expecting a scene. Then I pressed the button. The first image flashed across the large screen above the fireplace, a screenshot of his cruel message from weeks ago. The one mocking my mother, clear, bold, undeniable. A gasp, a shifting of chairs. "Ah!" whisper, then another. He froze mid-laugh. His smile faltered. His eyes widened, darting around the room. He was searching for allies, for someone to back him up, but there was nothing. His audience, the same people who had once laughed at me, were silent. They were absorbing the truth, their eyes reflecting shock, disbelief, and finally, judgment. I pressed forward, deliberately showing the next screenshot, a voice note where he laughed at a story he told about humiliating me in class. The tone, the laughter, the sheer arrogance it was all laid bare for everyone to see. The whispers grew louder, spreading like wildfire. I could hear fragments. I cannot believe he said that. Is this real? All this time? Aiden stumbled backward, his words catching in his throat. This isn't. I let him fumble. I let the room absorb the evidence before I spoke. Silence was my ally, and it was devastating. His bravado crumbled visibly. The color drained from his face. His chest rose and fell rapidly as if he had been running, trapped in a storm he had never anticipated. Another screenshot, another whisper. Each one a layer of truth, a carefully stacked proof of his arrogance and cruelty. His empire of confidence, built on the laughter of others and the assumption that he was untouchable, was crumbling. Frame by frame, I finally spoke, my voice calm, measured, carrying through the room with clarity. This is who you are. This is what you thought no one would see. And this is what happens when arrogance meets patience. Aiden's jaw tightened. His eyes scanned the room frantically, but the support he had counted on was gone. People were turning to each other, nodding, murmuring quietly. His reputation, the very thing he had weaponized against me, was shattered in real time. The tension was almost unbearable. I could feel my own heart racing, not from fear but from the surge of triumph. I had waited. I had observed. I had let him dig his own patand. Now he was falling into it. He opened his mouth again, trying to justify, to explain, to salvage something, but there were no words strong enough to undo what had been revealed. His friends avoided his gaze, some shifting uncomfortably, others staring with disbelief. Even his family, who had once laughed at my mother's absence, looked at him differently. The truth undeniable. I felt a strange, overwhelming relief. My chest tight for weeks, with anger and anxiety, expanded. My hands unclenched, my shoulders dropped. I realized in that moment that every insult, every smirk, every humiliation I had endured had led to this. It was no longer pen, it was release, sweet and absolute. The room felt electric. People were talking quietly now, murmurs of astonishment and shock weaving through the crowd. Aiden stood frozen, a man stripped of his arrogance, exposed for exactly who he was. The very weapon he had wielded against Mia's confidence, his reputation, his cruelty had been turned back on him. I smiled slightly, not out of cruelty, but out of satisfaction. Calm satisfaction. I had one, not because I had screamed or fought, but because I had been patient, calculated, and precise. I had turned every ounce of humiliation he had inflicted into my own power. And then, finally, the final image appeared on the screen. A simple, undeniable piece of evidence, him laughing, mocking, arrogant, unguarded. The room went silent again. His fall from grace was complete. I took a step back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with vengeance and everything to do with justice. The weight I had carried for weeks, the shame, the anger, the fear, was gone. I had reclaimed it all, not with chaos, but with control. And in that moment, I understood something essential. Revenge is not about making someone suffer. It is about reclaiming your power, your dignity, your self-respect, and ensuring that those who thought themselves untouchable finally see the truth. Aiden had laughed at me, at my mother, at my life. And now he was quiet, exposed, judged, defeated. I exhaled slowly, deliberately. Relief, triumph, and validation washed over me like sunlight breaking through a storm. The room, once a theater of his arrogance, had become the stage of his reckoning. I had been the unseen force behind it, calm, patient, and utterly unstoppable. The room had emptied eventually, leaving only echoes of what had just unfolded. The air smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood, but it also carried the invisible residue of tension, of reckoning, of truth finally revealed. I sat on the edge of a chair, letting my heels rest, my hands unclenched for the first time in weeks. The adrenaline that had carried me through the night slowly drained, leaving behind a quiet warmth of vindication, of justice earned, of patience rewarded. In that moment, I reflected on everything that had led me here. Every humiliation Aiden had thrown at me, every mocking laugh, every pointed commentette, all had purpose now. Not because he had planned it, but because I had taken control of it. Life had given me the choice: remain crushed by his arrogance, or turn it into a weapon of my own making. I had chosen the latter. And in doing so, I had discovered a truth I had always suspected but never fully embraced. Strength is quiet. Strength is deliberate. Strength is knowing your own worth when the world tries to convince you otherwise. I thought about my mother and the countless nights she had worked tirelessly, smiling despite exhaustion, teaching me resilience without words. She had faced a world that underestimated her, just as I had been underestimated. And in this moment, I realized I was not simply reclaiming my dignity, I was honoring hers as well. Every glance I had received that night, every whisper in the room, every shift of judgment away from cruelty and toward awareness, felt like a tribute to the lessons she had instilled in me: patience, observation, and the power of quiet determination. I also thought about Aiden, the man who had thought himself untouchable. The thing about arrogance is that it blinds you. He had assumed his confidence, his wealth, his charm would shield him from consequences. And yet, when the truth was revealed, he was powerless. I felt no pity for him, only clarity. Karma, I realized, is not always immediate, but it is relentless. Those who believe cruelty is a shortcut to superiority often forget that the universe has a memory and that every action carries its weight. For myself, the experience was transformative. I had learned to turn vulnerability into strategy, pain into precision, humiliation into empowerment. I had learned the value of patience, of careful observation, of knowing when to act and when to wait. More than that, I had learned that true power does not come from fear or intimidation. It comes from self-awareness, from integrity, from the ability to act decisively when the time is right. The world outside my room felt different the next day. I walked down the street with a new posture, a new confidence. People did not laugh at me. No one doubted me. I did not need validation because I had already proven to myself that I was capable of reclaiming my dignity and turning adversity into triumph. That quiet victory, the one that had unfolded behind smiles and measured steps, was more fulfilling than any immediate confrontation could have been. And I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Not because I sought revenge or dominance over others, but because I had discovered my own capacity for strength. Life would throw challenges, unfairness, cruelty. But I had learned how to navigate it with patience, with strategy, with integrity, and most importantly, with unwavering belief in my own worth. Looking back, I did not resent the humiliation anymore. I did not resent the pain. It had been the catalyst. It had been the fire that forged the strategy, the patience, the courage. And when the smoke cleared, I had emerged stronger, wiser, and unshakable. I smiled softly to myself, the city lights flickering across the window, a reflection of the journey I had traveled. The storm had passed. The reckoning had been delivered. And now a new chapter awaited, a chapter defined not by the cruelty of others, but by my own choices, my own strength, and the knowledge that I would never again allow anyone to define my worth. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales of justice and triumph. Share your own moments of standing up for yourself in the comments. We want to hear how you turned pain into power. Remember, patience, strategy, and belief in yourself can turn even the harshest humiliation into your greatest victory.